game of life do you play to win? This is Robert Manni, host of Guys TV, and this week my special guest is former director of Xbox and now novelist Robbie Bach. And it all starts right here, right now on Guys TV. You can also catch me on KCAA Radio here in Southern California, Guys Radio, my worldwide podcast, and we're on UK Health Radio all weekend long. Guys TV, Guys Radio, thanks for your support. Okay, Guys Radio, it is the interview portion of our show, and today we're going to talk about blockchains and the Blockchain Syndicate. We're going to talk about a cyber thriller, and we're going to talk about the writing process and Microsoft and the Xbox and so much more with my special guest. My special guest. His name is Robbie Bach, and he's quite the individual. He's quite the guy. He's a best-selling author, former tech executive at Microsoft who helped lead Microsoft through some of its dynamic years. He was chief Xbox officer. He spearheaded the creation of the iconic Xbox and Xbox 360. He retired from Microsoft, but he shifted his focus to philanthropy, civil advocacy, and storytelling. His first book that came out a few years ago was called The Wilkes Insurrection, and it introduces readers to what's Robbie's core character, Senator Tamika Smith. It's a high-stakes battle against domestic terror conspiracy. In his latest novel, we're going to talk about that today, and here it is, The Blockchain Syndicate. Robbie continues the gripping saga as Tamika faces a cryptic criminal syndicate threatening America's financial and political foundations with sharp insights into both technology and public life. I think you're going to enjoy my conversation with Robbie Bach because he brings a unique perspective to some of the most urgent issues of our time. So welcome to Guys Radio, Robbie Bach.
Hey, thanks for having me on. Looking forward to chatting, looking forward to a fun conversation.
So let's start at the beginning. You were working at Microsoft. First of all, how did you get to Microsoft? Was your path always going in the tech way? And where did you do at Microsoft? Were you in marketing for the Xbox? And then how did you get the kind of the writing bug? And you wrote a nonfiction book first about Xbox, and then you're kind of a Renaissance man, a man of many skills and advocacies. So tell us a little bit about your background. I think it'd be interesting for everybody.
Well, so I started in investment banking, ironically. Decided that I liked the sales and marketing process more than I did the investment banking process. So I went back to business school, switched to sales and marketing. And you know how this works. A bunch of companies come on campus, they interview. Microsoft was one of them. I interviewed with them in 1988. And got a job at Microsoft, was really excited about it, and was there for 22 years. And I started in sales and marketing, and then mostly in the early days working on Microsoft Office. So when Office was just being created, I was doing some of the formation marketing for that product. And then later in my career, switched to Xbox, and that as a startup inside Microsoft. And so I was the general manager of that. So I was we called me the chief Xbox officer, sort of a cute name. And, that was just an awesome, crazy experience. And when I left Microsoft, I had, other things I really wanted to do. And so I've been blessed to have a second career.
Now, did you work with Ballmer or Gates or both of them? And did they work with each other? How did the whole thing work? Where were you in kind of the group, the inner core there?
In the early scheme of things, I was just a guy, so to speak. And then later on, when I was working on Office, you're the head of marketing for a big product. You get a lot of exposure to Steve and Bill. And then when we started Xbox, I went to work directly for Steve and worked for him for 7 years and spent a lot of time with Bill. He and I would have a one-on-one meeting every 4 to 6 weeks just to talk about where Xbox was and what we were doing. So I had a lot of exposure to those guys and learned a ton from them.
Mm-hmm. And you stay in touch with them?
I do, not as much Bill. I see Steve reasonably regularly. We live in a similar community. We play golf at the same place, so I see him pretty regularly. I don't. I'm a Steve Ballmer fan. I'm not a Clippers fan,
I
so
was
I
going
don't
to
follow
ask.
them. So I love Steve. I'm probably not a Clippers follower, but I just think I learned just a ton from him, and as an individual, as a person, he's just a really good person.
It seems like as an outsider and somebody who has also a marketing, MBA in marketing background, and worked at Nabisco and some other uh, product, CPG product companies before
Sure.
getting into advertising. Seems like Balmer and Gates, they have such different personalities. And I see them, interviewed or separately. Or like, how did these guys work it out? How did they get along? Was it were you like a Steve guy or a Bill guy? Was that how it worked in Microsoft, or what was the culture like there?
Well, here's the thing. They shared a couple of things in common, which I think is what enabled them to work so well together. They were both intensely mission driven and intensely competitive. And so they had this shared passion for creating these new things and enabling these new capabilities for people. Now, Bill would approach that from the product technical perspective, and Steve would approach it more from the go-to-market perspective. And so when they were working at their best, those two things came together in a really powerful way. And so, sure, there were some people who worked for Steve, some people who worked in the product groups, which meant you worked more for Bill. But, in the end of the day, you ended up meeting and spending time with both of them.
Mm-hmm.
And you ended up in meetings where they were both there, and they bring different perspectives, but the same energy and the same commitment to quality work.
Wow, it must have been quite the experience. And have you read all the books about Microsoft? And do you think they're accurate, or do you think people from the outside get the true picture? Because obviously, well, Steve Ballmer's in the headlines right now a little bit for the Kauai situation, but
Sure.
that's small potatoes versus what Bill Gates. There's a lot of different opinions on Bill Gates and what he's doing, and it kind of all goes back to the subscription based. And the viruses with the software, and then fixing the viruses and carrying that on. I mean, is this how do you, without putting you on the spot too much, what's your reaction? What do you
Sure.
feel when you look back and you see this? Is like, oh, I've seen this, I know how this works, or this is just he's blazing new trails.
You know, mostly what I think is that uh, Bill and Steve both are really good people at their core, and they're trying to do the things that they see as right. Like all of us, they each have their failings, like I do. Like I don't know you well, but I'm sure you have some failings too. They each have their, so what I would call kryptonites. But Bill and Steve, you think about what Bill's doing. He's taking his second career, a career that he doesn't need to take, and he is spending all his time working on, trying to solve medical diseases, trying to figure out new energy sources for the world. He's trying to do good things. His personal life's complicated, but he's really trying to make advances. Steve, in addition to what he does for fun, which I think he's very serious about with the Clippers, but he and his wife Connie have an incredible foundation that is doing really groundbreaking work, and I do engage with the foundation some, and they're doing great work, in particular with young adults and trying to educate them. And then Steve has his USA Facts, which is really trying to bring visibility to how our government works.
Mm-hmm.
So you see two people in all their flaws that we all have, but you see two people who are really trying to do the right thing, and that to me is the bottom line. And I think it does distinguish them, if I'm honest, with from some other what I would call tech executives and startup people who are a little more focused on themselves and a little less focused on the world around them.
Mm-hmm. Interesting. Okay, let's talk about you. And thank you for letting us kind of get off on that. But I think that's an area that everybody always wants to learn more about, because both of those guys are in the news for different reasons these days. And I think it's going to continue. How did you come about first writing the book about Xbox? Let's start with your first book. What was the name of it, and what did you do what inspired you to write that book, and how did you
Yeah.
prepare to do that? Because writing nonfiction, to me, it's easier, but a nonfiction is a different animal than using the power of story in a novel. Even though you use the power of story in nonfiction, it's a little bit different.
I agree with you. I think it's a very different process. Xbox Revisited got started because when I left Microsoft, let's just be clear, I left Microsoft 2010. I have no intention of becoming a writer. That was not the reason I left. I left because I wanted to do more civic engagement. So I got involved in a bunch of civic boards, which I continue today. And as I was doing that, you see what's going on around the country. And I wrote, this is going to sound goofy and very Microsoft geeky, but I wrote a 12-page paper on how the country could fix itself. And 12 pages is just long enough that nobody wants to read it, and not really long enough to do any detail and really get into anything meaningful. So it was the perfectly wrong length of writing. And so I had to either make it 3 pages or make it 200 pages. And so I chose to make it 200 pages. And when I started, the basics of this work is a strategy framework we used to fix the Xbox business called the 3P framework. If you're challenging a hard problem, do you know what your 1-sentence purpose is? Do you have your 5 principles of how you're going to work? Do you have your 5 priorities of what has to get done? Really simple framework. So the book is explaining the framework and then applying it to the US situation in the United States. And it's told, to your storytelling point, in the story of how Xbox evolved. So if you read that book, you get the story of the creation of Xbox, how we left the business in a bad place, and then how we fixed it. And then you also get the civic story of things we could be doing better in our country. So that was wonderful. I published it in 2015. I still talk from it when I do public speaking. People still pick it up and read it. I actually think if you read it in the context of what's going on in the country right now, it'd be super relevant. And then I said, gosh, I love this writing thing. This is really fun. And I said, well, do I want to write another nonfiction book? And to your point, I'm a bit of a glutton for punishment. I said, no, that doesn't sound very interesting. It's something I think I could do, but I want to write fiction. And fiction, I think, is way more complicated, way more challenging. And that's how I got started on what became the Wilkes Insurrection.
Now, what is that story about, and who is Tamika Smith, and why did you? Well, let's start there, because I have some other questions about the process and the character.
Yeah, so the process started a little bit like this. I wrote 100 pages. I kid you not. I wrote 100 pages with no story in mind, about 5 characters that were running around in my head, and a day in the life of those 5 characters. And one of those characters turned out to be Tamika Smith. So I write that, and then I say, okay, how does this become a story? And then I add a villain, and I write 30 pages about who this villain is. And then I start to connect that day and what happens to each of those characters on that day and how it interconnects. And when I'm done, I have a 550-page book, which is a crazy too long book, the perfect example of an inexperienced fiction writer. I wrote, the full background of every character. So it's just not the right thing. So I then went through and edited that back to a 350-page traditional fictional thriller. Now, the storyline there is about a domestic terrorist, let's say that, who pretends to be Islamic. And it feeds on the country's sort of paranoia. And, after 9/11, you can imagine why. And this person is clever enough to have the FBI and other people looking for someone who's an Islamic terrorist, when in fact, the guy's from the Midwest. He's from Detroit. And so Tamika gets involved in this story because there's an opening scene where a plane crashes at her Air Force base, Offutt Air Force Base in Nebraska. She rescues somebody from the plane. The rescue is famous, and she becomes more famous. She leaves the reserves in the Air Force, runs for Senate, and becomes a U.S. Senator. So that's the basic guts of the story. And then the question is, how does Tamika, the FBI, and a white hat hacker named Bryce Roscovich, how do they chase down Ford Wilkes and figure out who he is and catch him.
Now, were you a fan of the kind of thrillers? This type of there's a lot of a lot of guys are into this type of book where there's basically a thriller, and there's a lot of terrific writers in the area. Were you influenced at all? Do you read some of these books?
Oh,
Did you say, okay, I'm going to do something a little bit, I like that, but I'm going to do it. Obviously, you want to put your own spin on it, but how did you kind of understand the category? Because you're a marketing guy too. You got to understand what's going on out there.
Yeah, so there are really three genres of books I read. One is history. I love history, so I've read a ton of history books. I read a lot of what I'll call historical fiction, which I think is really interesting. And then I read a lot in the mystery and thriller category. So growing up, my favorite writer was Robert Ludlum, the real Robert Ludlum, not the fake Robert Ludlum that you see published now.
Right.
So his original books are really great. There's a writer named Nelson DeMille who has a character named John Corey, who's an FBI agent and works in counterterrorism. I was heavily influenced by Nelson DeMille and his work. And there's a mystery writer named Sue Grafton who has passed away, who wrote the ABC Mystery Series. And, so I read 25 of her books. And so, from Sue Grafton, I take character development. From Nelson DeMille, I take this terrorist activity development. And from Robert Ludlum, you get the action sequences, and you try to put those things together in one genre of work.
Fantastic. Okay. My special guest on today's Guys Radio is Renaissance man and writer and tech wizard, Robbie Bach. Here's his new book, The Blockchain Syndicate. We're going to get to that in a moment. A little bit more on Tamika Smith. Now, my experience has been as a writer that, I'm a guy, so I can take different guys' perspectives, but it's not as easy for me, at least, to write from a woman's perspective. You picked a woman as your main character. Tell us about what I just said, and also why you've chose a woman and how you've approached that, knowing that you're a dude.
Well, first things first, when I wrote those 5 character sketches, there's a guy named Johnny Humboldt in both books, and Johnny was originally going to be my main character. And what I found writing Johnny is that he wasn't difficult to write, but I also wasn't able to make him to bring him to life in a rich way. I have a harder time writing my male characters. They all sort of feel the same. And so I spend most of my time when I'm writing male characters separating them so that each of them is unique and distinct. When I started writing a few female characters, there's 3 in the first book and 2 in the second book, and I started writing those characters, for me, that was actually easier. And if you ask, and I have several women who are authors who are 2 of my very best friends, and they read everything I do, and they tell me your female characters are better written than your male characters.
That's fascinating.
It was super interesting. Tamika and I have nothing in common. Tamika is an Olympic class sprinter. She's Black. She's served in the Air Force. She's a U.S. Senator. I'm a white guy. I played tennis. I never served in the military. We have nothing in common. And yet, when I'm at the keyboard writing Tamika, I know exactly what she's thinking. I know exactly what emotion is going through her head. And I've had to spend a lot of time. I've had a number of people read the character for authenticity, both because she's a woman and because she's Black and because she served in the military. And I've had military people read it. I've had some Black women read it, and I've had some other women read it. And, I get a lot of really good feedback on it. It's a mystery to me, but somehow she's in my head and I can really write her as a character.
Okay, fantastic. Oops, sorry, I just dropped the book. Let me pick it up again. The Blockchain Syndicate. So it's not a sequel. This is a standalone, the second book, and what probably will become a series about Tamika. How did this one come about, and what did you do to tap into a new idea? What inspired you to say, okay, I got a different story here?
To be clear, Blockchain Syndicate is in fact a sequel to the Wilkes Insurrection. So Tamika's in both books. But the plot line is actually quite different. So in Wilkes Insurrection, the plot line.
But what I meant, Robbie, is you don't have to read the first book to get to the second. So they stand on their own.
Well, and as an author, I will tell you the hardest thing about writing the second book was knowing I had both audiences.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
Yeah.
I had an audience that would have read the Wilkes
Right.
Insurrection, and they have to be able to enjoy the Blockchain Syndicate. And then, as you point out, there are people who won't have read that, who read the Blockchain Syndicate, and they have to read it as a standalone book. So, in the Blockchain Syndicate, the premise is the following: how could someone perpetrate a series of crimes, a conspiracy of crimes, and maintain anonymity? How do they shield themselves using technology from the authorities? And how do they use technology to do that? And blockchain is one of these very interesting technologies that, on the one hand, there's full transparency that everything that happens in a blockchain, you can see every transaction that takes place. The
For the
problem,
benefit of our listeners and viewers, and that was going to be my question. Talk to us about what exactly is a blockchain in layman's
sure,
terms.
sure. In layman's term, a blockchain is a ledger. It's a list of transactions that takes place. And if you own cryptocurrency, or if you know just a little bit about cryptocurrency, cryptocurrency is tracked and managed using blockchain. Every transaction that takes place is in the blockchain, so to speak. And so in this book, instead of having transactions of financial, trading crypto, your transactions are in bad acts and in crimes.
Mm-hmm.
And so my lead bad guy uses blockchain to shield himself from the authorities and to authorize and orchestrate crimes that happen. And those crimes, for real reasons, start to focus on Tamika Smith very quickly and affect her personally. And so there becomes this contest between Tamika and the FBI and this evil person and a couple of his cohorts to try to see who can figure out exactly what's going on.
Now, you've also got an interesting and very topical situation in the book where there's a school shooting that goes on. Talk to us about why you included that and why do you think that's important to the story itself and also just something you want to talk about in your writing.
Well, look, I think the broader topic of social violence and the lack of civility in the country is a real issue. And, we're talking, 2 days after somebody was
Right.
assassinated.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's independent of your political views. That's just an incredibly sad and bad thing for the country. And so we have to be able to face the fact that these things are happening. And in fact, as you read the Blockchain Syndicate, which, the basic story was written 2 years ago, you will find that many of the things that are in there are happening now in the country. And I can't really explain that. It's not like somebody's following the text because nobody had it. But my goal is to write reality of what's going on and to expose that to people and say, hey, this is something we have to deal with. And look, shootings at schools are the saddest thing you can imagine. These are innocent kids. They should be growing up in an innocent space. And when we take that innocence away, we change their lives forever. And even if you're a student who's not at a school where there's been a shooting, you have, drills to prepare for an active shooter on your school site. I mean, that's
yep. I know my son's 12. He deals with it.
You deal with it. That's just really hard for me. And so I just think these are challenges that have to be discussed and have to be exposed.
Now, Robbie, my special guest once again is Robbie Bach, author and ex-Microsoft Xbox guru. Blockchain Syndicate is the new book in his series. What is the main takeaway you want people to get from these two books, the Wilkes Insurrection and the Blockchain Syndicate?
Two things. First, well, three things. One, I want people to walk away saying, I really love those characters. I think deep character development is something that is often missed in thrillers. And I want the characters to be meaningful and come to life. Second, I want them to say, wow, I couldn't put that down. Right? Independent of anything else, a thriller has to be something where you get to the end of the chapter and you don't turn off the light, you read the next chapter. So, and then third, I want people to get to the end and say, wow, I actually learned something about myself, about what's going on in the country. I'm going to take some action, whatever it is, some civic engagement, because I see now the need for me to be involved and engaged.
Mhm.
And that's not an explicit thing. It's not like there's a Tamika says, "Hey, you should go do something" at the end.
All right.
It's a feeling people should walk away with after they've read the book.
Mhm. Now, for yourself, what has happened with you? What has been your experience of writing two novels? How did that change you, if at all? And what did you learn about yourself?
Mm, that's a really good question. Um, I think a couple of things. It's made me meaningfully more self-aware. And the reason I say that is because when you're writing a character, you have to be deep inside their head and you have to think about the fullness of what's going on consciously and subconsciously and why they do the things they do. And it's forced me to think more deeply about why I do what I do.
Mhm.
And when I'm writing characters who have strengths and weaknesses, it's made me think more, about myself, what I'm good at, what I'm not good at. So there's this weird transference that happens. Sometimes, authors put themselves into the character. I feel like I've pulled myself out of the characters in a way
Mhm.
and taken something away from that, which I think is really cool. And the other takeaway, if you'd asked the Xbox team during our time together, who's the least likely person to do a creative act in the world, I would have been at the top of everybody's list. And so for me to find creativity in my head and to express that in words, I found a part of myself I didn't know was there.
But I will bet, Robbie, that just working with Xbox and leading a team, there's a creativity in that also. It's not writing a novel creativity, but it's a different type of creativity. I mean, we create every action we do is art. Really, somebody said, I think I don't know, it was the Toltec said that your greatest work of art is your how you live your life, and that's
Mm-hmm.
something that unfolds every minute of every day. But when you were working on these characters, did you find that you're first of all, how did you make sure you differentiated the characters and
Mm.
had them not to be cookie cutter? So, like the antagonist couldn't be all bad. He has to be either be funny or something where has to have two sides because everybody thinks they're right. So,
Yeah.
how did you deal with that? And then, did you notice while you were writing that a character kind of crept up and became more important and wanted to be heard more? Because I found in the writing process for my novel that the characters were talking to me and saying like more of me, or not quite exactly on the nose like that, but I felt that okay, this character needs more because they're really interesting and they can add to the story.
So to your first point, with each character, and I've learned this from editors. So I've had some editors who have really helped me sort of pull this out. With each character, you have to decide what's their primary motivation. So what's the thing at their core that motivates them? And when you have in both of my books, there are sort of multiple personalities of good and bad people. So if you have, let's say you have two or three people who are nominally on the bad side, they can't have the same motivation. They have to have a different
Mm-hmm.
sensibility for what motivates them. And from that motivation comes strengths and weaknesses, good and bad. And you wrap those good and bad around that motivation. And I have found that if I can articulate the core motivation for someone, I can then build things around. So, without giving anything away in the story, in the Blockchain Syndicate, one of my bad characters' core motivations is the dude just wants to make money. He is completely motivated by the financial outcomes he can achieve. There's another bad character in the book, and again, not giving anything away, who is completely motivated by her loyalty to her country. And everything is about her country and where she's from and how she is patriotic around that. So I tend to think motivation first and then good
Mm-hmm.
and bad on top.
Mm-hmm.
As the characters that have sort of risen, there's a character in both books named Bryce Roskovich. And in the first book, in the Wilkes Insurrection, Bryce was an idea He was the son of two of the other characters. And they talked a lot about Bryce, but I hadn't written a single word about Bryce until I was almost 3/4 of the way through writing the book.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back and I said, hey, Bryce can play a role in this. I need somebody to do this. And Bryce Roskovich became my white hat hacker who
Mm-hmm.
is helping the FBI secretly behind the scenes to figure this out, because the FBI is good, but they're not great. And Bryce is great.
Mm-hmm.
And so Bryce suddenly rose in prominence. And I will tell you, the people who read Bryce in either book say after Tanika, he's their favorite character. And
Mm-hmm.
he's a goofy dude.
Mm-hmm.
Right? He's completely different
Right.
from the rest of us. But people are attracted to that uniqueness and attracted to the internal things he is wrestling with in both stories.
Oh, that's fantastic.
It's so cool.
You've got it thought out. So best of luck with Blockchain Syndicate. Everybody check out the new book, contemporary thriller, Robbie Bach. You're a smart guy and you've been involved in so many different areas and particularly technology. Let me ask you some questions. Maybe you can just expound on them for our audience and we can all learn something, because that's what we do on Guys Radio. We bring up concepts and modalities and different things and we have a discussion about them. And then our audience decides, do I want to learn more or do I think that's a bunch of poo or whatever? That's up to them. We just bring them the information. So crypto, what's your sense of crypto? You're a tech guy. You hang around a lot of wealthy people. I'm sure you made out well at Microsoft and Xbox. What's your sense? Because so many people are like, is it going to crash next year? Am I getting in too late? What's the safest way to buy it? Do I use Coinbase? Why can't my broker buy crypto for me? And whatever. There's a lot of like confusion about it. And when you're in that mode, you can make bad decisions.
Yeah. So first thing first, I don't give investment advice. That's first thing to say.
Okay, obviously, of course.
Second thing to say is the way I think about crypto is the same way I think about gold. Crypto is an asset. Now, in a funny way, it's a imaginary asset in a way, right? It's a digital asset that's been sort of artificially created. So it's like somebody created a bunch of gold and hid it on the internet. And crypto mining is about going out on the internet and finding the hidden gold and bringing it back. But investing in crypto is just like investing in gold. It's an asset that has a perceived value as long as it has a perceived value. And when it doesn't have a perceived value, it doesn't have a perceived value, right? So there's, and gold prices go up and down and cycle. And right now gold is in vogue because people, it's a high risk environment. There's a lot of turbulence. People are unsure. So for mostly, I would say emotional reasons, they migrate to gold because they think that's a safe haven. Crypto's the same way. People have migrated to crypto over the last couple of years because they look and they say, well, maybe this is a place. It's not a stock. I'm not subject to, earnings reports and those kinds of things. And, I don't want to leave my money earning 2.5% interest. So I'm going to put it in crypto. So I think that's the way you have to think about it. If you're an asset-based investor and you think that that's a portion of your portfolio should be in those kinds of assets, right? Crypto's a perfectly legitimate place to invest. If you're like me and you say, I don't invest in things that I don't understand the value of very well, and I don't really understand the value of gold, I don't really understand the value of any of the cryptocurrencies, so I hold none of either. At least not consciously. Maybe there's some funds I've invested in that hold some gold or some crypto. I don't know, but I haven't directly invested in that I've never invested in crypto. And gold, I don't know, last time I held a gold investment was probably 30 years ago.
Okay, fair. Very well articulated. And thank you. I'm sorry to put you on the spot with that one because it's not exact. It's kind of tech. So I wanted to get that in there. But also, more importantly, AI. It's on the tip of everybody's tongue nowadays where it's come up so fast. And now anybody who's got an iPhone or whatever type of phone you use, you're going to have some type of AI built into it now. So people are using AI every day and everybody's trying to learn, well, how do I use this different than I would use Google per se? And how is this going to change, the world we live in and the job market? And to your point, creativity is something that's you've kind of evolved into, and it seems like there'll always be a market for creativity in the job market where AI can do what AI does, but it's different than humanity. Your thoughts?
Um, I think that's actually pretty much in sync with my thoughts. I think you have to separate things into a couple of different buckets. Um, there's the bucket of AI as agents who do work with you and for you. I think that's actually, let's call that a productivity bucket.
Mm-hmm.
That's actually a very interesting space. It's a place where, there are some manual tasks or some things that are, pretty easy, like go gather data on this, which I could do myself, or I could pay somebody to do, but AI can do it more efficiently and more effectively. And I think there will be many things that are mechanical rote processes, in particular things that involve data gathering, that AI will take advantage of. There will be some cases where you say to the agent, make my PowerPoint prettier, and it will do that, and the value out of that will be relatively low. It'll be easy,
Mm-hmm.
but it'll be relatively low. Likewise, people will say, well, when I write a long email, I have AI spruce it up. Great. Happy to have that spruce up your email. Do I think that adds a ton of value? Maybe. But to me, that's not earth shattering. Anyway, that agent space, I think, is really important. And if you're a company or an individual, what you have to look at is you have to say, not, I must use AI. What you have to do is you have to say, okay, let's look at the tasks and the things I'm trying to do and say, is there somebody who's created an agent or done a tool where I can explore that and see if it works better for me? I'll give you a stupid example, but a very specific one. I am producing a video trailer for the Blockchain Syndicate.
Mm-hmm.
And I did this for Wilkes Insurrection, and I hired a local firm to do it. So I decided this is the only way I have used AI in the entire process of the book. I decided to create a video trailer entirely using AI.
Wow.
So I sent a request to an AI service, a video service. I'm not going to promote anybody. So I sent a request to a video service. I said, here's a description of the book. Produce a 1.5-minute trailer for me. And so now I work through that process. I clean things up. I send prompts to it, la, la, la. I'm about 90% done. And we are, if I compare quality, it's probably 85% as good as the one I did with a real service.
Mm-hmm.
Is that perfect? No. Do I think I could have done slightly better hiring somebody to do it? The answer is yes, for sure.
What was missing, Robbie? What do you think? And was it due to the fact that it was AI?
Well, what's missing is there's a seamlessness in the way the video is synced together that doesn't quite work, right? And there's some imagery that they use in the video which isn't quite right. The problem, of course, is getting the AI to tune that imagery perfectly is actually really hard. And you'd have to try, it's repetitive. No, I didn't mean that, I meant this. And then it tries again. And then I didn't mean that, I meant this. And so there's a repetitiveness to the process where if I'm working with you on a video, I could say, hey, this didn't happen that way, it happened this way. And you'd ask me 3 questions and we would figure it out. So I will probably use that video. It will be good enough. And by the way, it will cost me 1/20th of what I paid for the other video. So it's probably a good, from a cost benefit perspective, it's probably great. So that's the agent world of AI. The second world of AI is, think of it as AI as your advisor. You want to ask AI for assistance on something. And I don't mean go do this. I mean, hey, I'm thinking about this. What advice would you give me? What has experience showed? What have other people done? Help me with a strategy that you're pursuing, et cetera. And that's a little bit more, less AI as a taskmaster and more AI as a thinking partner. And that to me is, that's a place where there's value. But I also think you won't replace the interaction of 5 people in a room debating things. I just don't think that will go away. So, I'd encourage people to use it as a first blush. Hey, I'm wrestling with a topic. I'm going to have an offsite with 5 people. What do you think? You're going to get some ideas from AI in doing that. And then you're going to go into the room with people and you're going to further that discussion. And I think that kind of sort of digital sidekick
I love that.
is really valuable. And then there's the third thing, which I will just say is something I just don't understand. Somebody described this as AI as a companion. And there are people who get up every morning and say hello to their AI agent. And it's somebody they live with. And to me, that's a bridge too far personally. If I'm going to socialize, it's like social media taken to the 100th level. Right. If I don't even do much social media because I don't find that rewarding. I want to spend time with people. And this would just take it to another level. To me, it's very isolating. And so I think like every technology, there's great stuff, there's some good stuff, and then there's some bad stuff.
Fantastic.
And we have to sort through that. Sorry, long answer to a complicated
No.
question.
Great answer. And thank you. The Blockchain Syndicate, the new book by Robbie Bach. Robbie, tell everybody where they can learn more about you, where they can get your books, etc.
So if you want to learn more about me, it's pretty simple. You can go to robbiebach.com. If you want to learn more about the books, there's a dedicated page which you can get to from robbiebach.com, or you can go to wilkesinsurrection.com or theblockchainsyndicate.com and get all the information you want. Both the books are orderable on Amazon and all the other book sites that you might go to. Blockchain Syndicate comes out on October 21st, but you can pre-order now. And excited for everybody to read it.
Well, great job. Keep doing all the work you're doing with philanthropy and everything else, because you're a real Renaissance man. You're a guy's guy. And thank you so much for being on Guys Radio, Robbie Bach.
Thanks for having me. Really enjoyed it.
If you enjoy the guests and content I bring you each and every week to Guys TV and Guys Radio, please support us by subscribing to our channels and platforms. Thank you.